What happened to those forgotten 10-minute recipes from old cookbooks? They once filled busy kitchens with warmth, feeding families fast without losing care. When did we start calling convenience the same thing as comfort? Quick cornflake candy clusters showcased the creative use of breakfast cereal in 1950s sweets, offering a treat that could be made in one pan and cooled in minutes. Housewives melted corn syrup and peanut butter together until smooth, then gently folded in crunchy cornflakes to coat each flake with the warm mixture. Spoonfuls were dropped onto waxed paper, where they set into crisp, chewy clusters that children could grab as soon as they cooled. This no-bake dessert became a favorite for school events, church socials, and rainy day kitchen projects with children. The peanut butter provided protein and a rich flavor, while the corn syrup bound everything together without the need for an oven. Because it required no precise measuring or fancy equipment, it was nearly foolproof, a quality every busy homemaker appreciated. The sweet aroma filled the kitchen quickly, making it almost impossible to wait for the clusters to harden completely before tasting. In less than 10 minutes, a box of cereal transformed into a memorable candy that defined simple home indulgence. Cornmeal. Crusted catfish fillets brought the taste of a southern fish fry to the table in minutes, turning thin fillets into golden perfection. A simple dredge of cornmeal seasoned with salt, pepper, and a hint of cayenne coated the fish, while oil heated in a cast-iron skillet. As soon as the fillets touched the pan, they sizzled and released a savory aroma that promised a feast. In only a few minutes, each side crisped to a deep golden brown, while the flesh stayed tender and flaky. Remember those working man's dinners you could make in just 10 minutes after a long day on the line? These dinners filled mid-century kitchens with quick heat, heavy plates, and the smell of hard work turning into comfort. What did those rushed but satisfying nights give us that slower meals never could? Meatball sub with jarred sauce turned a simple grocery shortcut into a filling dinner that satisfied every craving for Italian flavor without a long simmer. Pre-made meatballs went straight from the freezer into a skillet of bubbling jarred marinara, their aroma mingling with garlic and herbs as they heated through. Pimento cheese sandwich melts were one of those quick, bold dinners that came straight from old cookbooks packed with practical, no-nonsense recipes. You took slices of bread, spread them thick with creamy, tangy pimento cheese, and grilled them in a skillet until the outside was golden and crisp. It was not just a sandwich. It was a fast, hot meal with big flavor that came together in 10 minutes or less. Pimento cheese was everywhere back then, especially in southern kitchens, but families all over used it to stretch groceries and add some punch to an otherwise plain dinner. You could eat the melt with pickles on the side or a handful of chips if you had them, but most folks kept it simple. The creamy cheese, the sharp bite of pimentos, the crunchy bread, it all worked together to make a dinner that felt filling without taking much effort. These meals showed up again and again in faded cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because they did exactly what they needed to: feed everyone fast. Funny how the boldest flavors came from the simplest tricks. Fried bologna and mustard sandwich was a 10-minute fix that never pretended to be fancy, but always hit the spot. You tossed a slice of bologna into a hot pan, let it sizzle until the edges curled, slapped it onto soft bread, and added mustard. That was it. Simple, quick, and surprisingly satisfying. Back in Grandma's day, this showed up when money was tight, groceries were low, or you just needed something fast before heading back to work or school. It was salty, smoky, and the bologna crisped up just enough to feel like real cooking. Kids loved it, adults leaned on it, and every household had their own little spin on the recipe. Some added cheese, some toasted the bread, but most kept it plain and practical. You would not find this in glossy magazines, but you would find it tucked in those old handwritten cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next. Another quick forgotten gem from a time when meals had to be fast, filling, and affordable. Quick brown butter popcorn transformed an everyday snack into something worthy of a special church outing. Fresh popcorn was popped in a heavy stovetop pan until every kernel burst into a fluffy cloud. Meanwhile, butter was melted slowly until it turned a deep, nutty brown, releasing an aroma that drew children and adults alike to the kitchen door. The hot popcorn was tossed in the fragrant butter and dusted with a generous spoon of sugar, which caramelized slightly on the warm kernels, coating them in a delicate sweet crust. Some cooks added a pinch of salt to sharpen the flavor, while others relied solely on the natural sweetness of the browned butter. Served in paper cones or simple bowls, it filled the air with a rich, toasty scent that mingled with the smoke of outdoor grills and the sound of gospel singing. This treat required only a few ingredients and a few minutes, yet it felt indulgent and festive, reminding everyone that a little care in the kitchen could elevate even the most ordinary pantry staples into something worth sharing under the open sky of a summer picnic afternoon. Cream cheese and olive sandwiches were once the fancy tea lunch that quietly slipped onto regular kitchen tables when people needed something fast. You whipped cream cheese until fluffy, stirred in chopped green olives, and spread the whole mix onto rye or white bread. It sounds strange now, but back then, this salty, creamy combo was considered upscale, especially if you cut the crusts off. It showed up at luncheons, garden parties, and even school lunches when moms wanted to make something that looked like they tried. Old cookbooks listed it under easy entertaining, but most folks made it because it came together in 5 minutes and filled you up without cooking a thing. Some people swapped in pimento olives or added sliced cucumbers, but the classic version stayed simple: creamy, salty, and fast. It may not win over modern taste buds, but for families watching the clock and the grocery bill, these little sandwiches were a retro shortcut that stuck around when time was tight. Canned salmon patties turned a simple pantry staple into a golden brown main course that could be on the table in minutes, making it a reliable choice for housewives balancing busy schedules and tight budgets. Drained canned salmon was mixed with breadcrumbs, beaten egg, and a hint of onion or parsley before being shaped into small patties. These were quickly fried in a shallow layer of oil until crisp on the outside and tender inside. The mild fish flavor paired beautifully with a squeeze of lemon or a dollop of homemade tartar sauce, offering a taste of the sea without the cost of fresh seafood. Families appreciated that the recipe provided protein-rich nourishment while keeping grocery bills manageable. Because the ingredients were shelf-stable, it was easy to prepare even when the refrigerator was nearly empty. Many children remembered the satisfying crunch and warm, savory interior long after the last bite was gone, making this a beloved standby of the mid-century kitchen and a perfect example of fast, practical cooking. Steak tips with garlic butter turned small pieces of beef into a dinner that tasted far more luxurious than the clock allowed. Bite-sized cubes of steak were seasoned with salt and pepper, then seared quickly in a smoking hot skillet until browned on the outside and just tender within. As the meat rested for a moment, butter melted in the pan with minced garlic and a handful of fresh parsley, creating a sauce that smelled like a steakhouse. The sizzling butter was poured back over the meat, coating every piece in rich, garlicky flavor. Served over toast, rice, or even plain with a side of vegetables, the dish offered restaurant-style indulgence in the time it took to set the table. Families loved how a modest amount of beef could feel like a feast, and the sound of butter hitting the hot pan became a signal that the day's work was over and something delicious was ready. Mayo and peanut butter sandwiches with lettuce were one of those strange little meals that somehow showed up again and again in old cookbooks, no matter how odd they sounded. You spread peanut butter on one slice of soft white bread, mayonnaise on the other, tucked in a crisp piece of iceberg lettuce, and slapped the whole thing together. That was dinner. It sounds like a dare now, but back then it was quick, filling, and surprisingly popular when groceries ran low and people had to make the best of whatever was in the pantry. The peanut butter gave it richness, the mayo added tang, and the lettuce brought crunch to pull it all together. It was salty, creamy, a little sweet, and ready in under 5 minutes. Families leaned on meals like this because they stretched simple ingredients, filled you up, and kept dinner from feeling impossible when paychecks were short. It might not have been fancy, but it worked. And funny enough, folks who grew up with this odd little sandwich still remember the taste. Sometimes getting by meant getting creative. Egg in a whole toast was one of those fast, comforting breakfasts that managed to make plain old bread and eggs feel like something special in under 10 minutes. You would grab a slice of sandwich bread, cut a circle right out of the center, toss it into a hot skillet with a little butter, and crack an egg into the hole. That was all it took. The bread toasted up golden, the egg cooked right inside, and suddenly breakfast was on the table without much work or money spent. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were hectic, paychecks were stretched thin, and everyone still needed a hot meal before heading out the door. It was a staple for school days, early church mornings, or whenever groceries were low but hunger was high. Some folks added cheese or herbs if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find egg in a hole scribbled on recipe cards, tucked into faded cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It might feel forgotten today, but back then, this quick breakfast trick kept countless families full, happy, and ready to face the day with just bread, eggs, and a hot skillet. Cold chicken and mayonnaise roll-ups were the leftover lunch you barely had to think about, but still managed to feel like a proper meal. You shredded leftover chicken, stirred in mayo, maybe a little salt or pepper, and spread it onto soft white bread slices. Then you rolled them up tight, sliced them into little spirals if you wanted to be fancy, and lunch was ready in minutes. Some folks added celery sticks or pickles on the side, but most kept it plain, just cold chicken, bread, and mayo doing the heavy lifting. This quick lunch showed up everywhere from family picnics to old-school lunchboxes because it made use of leftovers, took no time, and filled you up fast. It may not have been flashy, but for busy days and bare cupboards, these little roll-ups worked better than most would guess. Frosted pineapple rings were the kind of cheerful dish that caught every eye on a church picnic table in the 1960s. Thick, golden slices of canned pineapple were drained and patted dry before being chilled on a wide platter. A creamy mixture of softened cream cheese whipped with powdered sugar and a drop of vanilla was then piped or spooned into the center of each ring, forming a snowy crown that contrasted beautifully with the bright fruit. Some cooks added a cherry on top for a pop of red, while others sprinkled finely chopped pecans to give a delicate crunch. The sweet-tart pineapple paired perfectly with the tangy cream cheese, making each bite a refreshing balance of flavors. Because the ingredients were inexpensive and easy to find year-round, these rings became a reliable favorite for large gatherings. They held up well in the summer heat and stayed cool inside picnic baskets packed with ice, offering a sweet treat that required no baking and almost no time. Guests often reached for them first, drawn by their glossy shine and promise of bright tropical flavor amid a spread of hearty casseroles and smoky barbecue. It was a simple dessert that tasted like sunshine and fellowship. Peanut butter banana milkshake gave families a frosty treat that doubled as a quick source of energy on busy days. Ripe bananas were blended with creamy peanut butter, cold milk, and a spoon of malted milk powder until thick and smooth. Housewives loved that it used fruit that might otherwise go to waste while delivering a protein-rich drink that satisfied hungry children returning from school. The natural sweetness of the bananas meant no extra sugar was necessary, and the malted powder added a nostalgic soda fountain flavor without the need to leave home. Because it required only a blender and a few pantry staples, the shake was ready before the ice cream man reached the end of the street. Parents enjoyed it as a light breakfast on hot mornings, while children begged for it as an after-dinner dessert. In less than 10 minutes, this recipe transformed simple ingredients into a creamy indulgence that felt both wholesome and festive, a perfect reflection of the inventive spirit of 1950s home kitchens. Fish stick. Po' boy brought a taste of the Gulf Coast to busy kitchens using only what sat in the freezer. Packaged fish sticks baked or pan-fried until their coating turned golden and crunchy, while soft sandwich rolls warmed in the oven. Tartar sauce was stirred together with chopped pickles, a squeeze of lemon, and a little mustard, filling the kitchen with a tangy scent. Shredded lettuce and thin tomato slices waited on the counter, ready to add freshness and color. As soon as the fish sticks finished, they were stacked inside the rolls, drizzled with the cool sauce, and topped with the crisp vegetables. The contrast of hot, flaky fish and chilled toppings tasted like a seaside lunch, even on a weeknight far from the water. In less than 15 minutes, a handful of inexpensive ingredients became a meal that felt special, making families forget how quickly it came together. Every crunchy bite delivered the carefree feeling of a coastal vacation without leaving the house, a reminder that a freezer staple can still capture the spirit of a faraway kitchen when imagination and hunger meet. Vienna sausage omelet rolls were the quick, clever way families turned pantry food into dinner when the fridge looked bare. You sliced up those little Vienna sausages, tossed them into a hot skillet, and poured whisked eggs right over the top. As the eggs set, you rolled them up like a little omelet wrap, cut it in half if you wanted, and dinner was ready before anyone had time to ask what was cooking. Old cookbooks were filled with recipes like this, fast meals that used up canned staples and turned them into something hot, salty, and filling. You could spoon a little relish on top, serve it with crackers, or keep it plain, but no matter how you fixed it, it hit the spot. Vienna sausages were cheap, easy to store, and lasted forever in the pantry, which made them a go-to when fresh meat was hard to come by. These omelet rolls were not fancy, but they filled you up and got dinner done without much effort. Meals like this stuck around because they worked. They made the most of what little you had, and sometimes that was more than enough. Grape jelly meatball skillet might sound like a strange mix now, but back then, it was one of those quirky, sweet, and savory meals that showed up fast and stretched what little meat you had. You browned some mini meatballs in a skillet, poured in grape jelly and a splash of mustard, and let it all bubble together. In 10 minutes flat, dinner was ready. It was sweet, tangy, salty, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this because they turned a small amount of ground beef into a meal that felt bigger than it was. You could find this in old church cookbooks, clipped from women's magazines, or scribbled onto recipe cards tucked in drawers. It was not about fancy ingredients. It was about getting something warm, satisfying, and a little fun onto the table, fast. Today it feels forgotten, but back then, this sweet skillet meal kept homes running during the toughest weeks. Jellied chicken salad cups were the quirky retro lunch you probably saw at your grandmother's house or flipped past in old homemaker guides. You made chicken salad, shredded chicken, mayo, celery, a little seasoning, and then set the whole thing in gelatin until it firmed up. It sounds strange now, but back then, this was peak luncheon presentation. You scooped the wobbly salad into lettuce leaves, added a sprig of parsley or a cherry tomato, and served it cold. It was light, chilled, and looked fancier than the ingredients actually were. These showed up at potlucks, garden parties, and quick family lunches when the oven stayed off and time was short. Gelatin molds made everything feel more polished, even when it came straight from leftovers and pantry basics. Old cookbooks loved recipes like this because they stretched food, required no cooking, and made lunch look impressive with barely any effort. It might feel out of place today, but jellied chicken salad cups were fast, filling, and weirdly fun when they first hit the table. Tomato and peanut soup brought a hearty yet thrifty option to the meal. Canned tomato soup was heated slowly with a spoonful of creamy peanut butter stirred in until it melted into a silky base. A pinch of cayenne or black pepper added gentle heat, while chopped onions or celery provided texture. The combination created a surprising depth of flavor, bright tomato balanced by the nutty richness of peanuts, that felt both comforting and exotic. This soup could be served hot on cool evenings or chilled for a refreshing lunch, making it flexible for year-round gatherings. It stretched ingredients beautifully, feeding many with just a few pantry staples, which made it a favorite among church cooks, mindful of budget and time. Served with crusty bread or simple crackers, it provided a protein boost that sustained singers and storytellers well into the evening. Guests often asked for the recipe, amazed at how two everyday ingredients could create something so unique and satisfying while reflecting the ingenuity of African American kitchens. Butterscotch pudding. Icebox cups delighted families with a cool, creamy dessert that could be assembled in minutes and chilled until the end of dinner. Instant pudding mix, a relatively new marvel in the 1950s, required only milk and a quick whisk to thicken into a smooth custard. Housewives poured the mixture into paper cups or small glasses, sometimes topping each with a dollop of whipped cream or a few crushed cookies for extra flair. Because the cups could be made hours in advance or just before the meal, they offered flexibility for busy evenings or last-minute guests. The rich butterscotch flavor felt indulgent yet familiar, appealing to both children and adults who associated it with candy shop treats. This recipe became a staple for families who wanted a sweet ending without heating the oven or dirtying extra pans. Served cold straight from the icebox, the pudding cups represented the modern convenience and playful indulgence that defined many mid-century kitchens. Vegetable fried rice with leftover meat transformed scraps and day-old rice into a fragrant dinner in less than 15 minutes. Cold-cooked rice was the key, each grain separating as it hit the hot oil of a wide skillet or wok. Bits of carrot, peas, and diced onions followed, their colors brightening as they sizzled. Leftover meat, whether pork chops, chicken, or beef, was sliced thin and tossed in with a splash of soy sauce and a drizzle of sesame oil. A quick scramble of eggs in the corner of the pan finished the dish, binding everything together with soft ribbons. The result was smoky and savory, carrying the scent of garlic and ginger through the house. Families appreciated how it cleared the refrigerator of odds and ends while creating a meal that tasted planned and special. Served hot straight from the pan, it proved that yesterday's rice and scraps of meat could become a satisfying dinner that rivaled takeout, saving both time and money without sacrificing flavor or comfort. Quick potato flake pancakes were one of those practical, budget dinners born from the back of old pantry shelves. You grabbed a box of instant potato flakes, mixed them with water and a little egg if you had it, then shaped the dough into small pancakes and fried them up in butter. That was dinner. It came together in 10 minutes flat and filled you up with simple, salty, crispy goodness. These pancakes were a staple of old cookbooks that loved pantry meals you could make fast with whatever was on hand. No peeling, no mashing, no waiting for potatoes to boil, just flakes, water, and a hot skillet. You could add herbs or cheese to dress them up, but most families kept it simple. They were crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, and filled your plate without much effort. This was dinner that made the best of tight grocery budgets and busy nights. Funny how something as humble as potato flakes could feel like a proper meal when you needed it most. Rice and raisin pudding on the stove was a 10-minute dessert that turned humble leftovers into something sweet, filling, and comforting when times were tough. You scooped leftover rice into a pot, poured in milk, added sugar, tossed in some raisins, and stirred it all together over low heat. That was it. In minutes, the mixture thickened into a creamy, sweet pudding that could stretch a small amount of rice into a treat for the whole family. It sounds simple now, but back then, every leftover counted, and recipes like this helped families avoid wasting a single grain. You would find rice and raisin pudding scribbled onto recipe cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It was a clever way to stretch ingredients, keep kids happy, and turn plain staples into something that felt like dessert. Most folks kept it basic, but sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or a dash of vanilla would show up if the pantry allowed. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, this quick stovetop dessert was a saving grace when groceries ran low and everyone needed a little sweetness. Zucchini fritters from leftovers were the garden surplus lunch that turned backyard vegetables into something hot, crispy, and filling when you had more zucchini than you knew what to do with. You grated up those extra zucchinis, mixed them with flour, eggs, and a little seasoning, then pan-fried them until golden brown. It was quick, cheap, and showed up in nearly every Use Your Garden Haul cookbook from the 1970s. Backyard gardens always seemed to over-deliver on zucchini, and fritters were a fast, satisfying way to keep all that produce from going to waste. They crisped up around the edges, stayed soft in the center, and felt just hearty enough to pass for lunch. Some families added shredded cheese, herbs, or breadcrumbs to stretch them further, but most kept it simple with just the basics. It was frugal, filling, and practical, a classic example of how families made the most of what they grew. It might not have been exciting, but zucchini fritters worked hard to keep plates full and grocery spending low. Cold spaghetti omelet transformed yesterday's dinner into a surprising lunch treat that delighted thrifty church cooks. Leftover spaghetti, often sauced lightly with tomato, was folded into beaten eggs, seasoned with black pepper and a touch of grated cheese, then poured into a hot skillet. As it cooked, the pasta strands settled into a golden crust while the eggs puffed gently around them. The omelet was flipped once to achieve a crisp exterior and a tender interior that sliced easily into wedges. Served at room temperature, it traveled well and stayed tasty even after hours on the picnic table. This dish reflected the inventive spirit of home cooks who refused to waste a single noodle and proved that a satisfying meal could come from simple leftovers. Children enjoyed the playful texture, while adults appreciated the hearty flavor that paired perfectly with fresh greens or sliced tomatoes from the church garden. It stood as a testament to resourcefulness and the belief that no blessing, however small, should ever be thrown away. Velveeta Tomato Melt became a weeknight favorite because it turned ordinary garden tomatoes into a warm, satisfying dish in less than 10 minutes. Thick slices of ripe tomato were arranged on toast or even sturdy crackers, sprinkled with a touch of salt and pepper, and topped with generous slices of Velveeta cheese. A few minutes under a hot broiler transformed the cheese into a bubbling blanket that clung to the juicy fruit beneath. Housewives loved how the mild, creamy cheese mellowed the acidity of the tomato while the toast stayed crisp enough to pick up by hand. It required almost no preparation, no chopping beyond slicing the tomato, and the ingredients were inexpensive and easy to keep on hand year-round. Many children returning from school found this snack waiting as an after-school surprise, while adults often served it alongside a simple soup for a quick supper. The aroma of broiled cheese drifting through the kitchen was enough to gather the family around the table before the timer even rang. Breakfast for dinner. Pancake stack with bacon turned a morning favorite into a fun and filling evening meal. Flour, milk, eggs, and a little baking powder whisked together quickly to form a smooth batter that poured onto a sizzling griddle, sending up a sweet, buttery aroma. Each pancake bubbled and browned in just minutes, ready to stack high while crisp bacon strips cooked in a nearby skillet. The smoky scent of bacon mingled with the warm fragrance of fresh pancakes, creating a kitchen atmosphere both cozy and exciting. Butter melted between layers, while a slow drizzle of warm maple syrup cascaded over the stack, soaking each fluffy round. The salty bacon provided the perfect counterpoint to the soft, sweet pancakes, making every bite a blend of textures and tastes. Families loved the playful switch of serving breakfast at the end of the day, and cleanup was minimal, leaving more time to relax. In less than 20 minutes, this meal offered pure comfort and a gentle reminder that the best dinners are sometimes the ones that break the rules in the most delicious way possible. Cheddar egg toast with pickle spears was proof that even with the bare minimum in your kitchen, you could still whip up a dinner that hit all the right notes. You started with plain sliced bread, cracked an egg over the top, sprinkled shredded cheddar cheese across the whole thing, and slid it under the broiler until the edges turned crisp and the cheese bubbled up. Add a pickle spear on the side, the sharper and brinier, the better, and suddenly dinner felt just a little more put together. This was the kind of meal that showed up in all those old spiral-bound cookbooks from the 1930s through the 70s. Fast, affordable, and surprisingly filling, it kept people going through lean years when even simple groceries felt like luxuries. Cheese, eggs, and bread might have been basic pantry staples, but when you combined them like this, it felt special enough to count. Families leaned on recipes like this because they worked. You could have dinner ready in under 10 minutes, and everyone stayed full. Those little meals did not need much, just heat, a little creativity, and whatever odds and ends you had lying around. Somehow, that was always enough. Applesauce and cottage cheese bowls were one of those sweet, simple meals that came together in minutes, filling the gap between breakfast, lunch, or even dessert when there was not much to spare in the pantry. You would scoop a generous helping of cottage cheese into a bowl, spoon cool applesauce over the top, and maybe add a little cinnamon if you had some lying around. That was all there was to it. It sounds plain now, but back when groceries were scarce and money had to stretch, this quick little bowl was a lifesaver. It was light, cool, sweet, and packed with enough protein to hold you over during busy days. In the 1960s, families leaned on easy meals like this to keep things running, especially when both time and ingredients were in short supply. You would find this simple recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, shared between neighbors, or tucked into handwritten kitchen notes passed down through the years. Some folks dressed it up with fruit or nuts if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. It might be forgotten today, but applesauce and cottage cheese bowls kept plenty of households fed, happy, and full with little more than 2 everyday staples. Leftover meatloaf sandwiches with ketchup were the reliable lunches that showed up in fridges across America the day after dinner. You sliced cold meatloaf thin, layered it onto soft sandwich bread, added a squirt of ketchup, and called it done. It was fast, filling, and made sure that last night's dinner stretched just a little further. Meatloaf itself was all about using affordable ingredients, ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, and stretching them into a meal for the whole family. Turning leftovers into sandwiches was the next logical step, and it worked. You got a hearty, savory lunch ready in under 10 minutes with barely any effort. Old cookbooks loved suggesting it. Lunchboxes were packed with it, and kids grew up knowing exactly what was coming after meatloaf night. You could add cheese or lettuce if you had them, but most families kept it plain with just meatloaf and ketchup. It might not sound glamorous now, but back then it was the fast, frugal lunch that kept families fed and made every bit of dinner count. Oyster cracker scramble offered a clever way to stretch a few eggs into a filling dish for a crowd. A skillet of butter was heated until foamy, then handfuls of plain oyster crackers were tossed in to soak up the flavor and toast lightly. Beaten eggs were poured over the crackers and stirred gently until just set, the crackers softening slightly while still holding a bit of crunch. A sprinkle of black pepper and a dash of milk gave the scramble a comforting richness without the need for extra cheese or meat. It was quick enough to make on a camp stove or church basement hot plate, which made it ideal for early morning preparations before the congregation arrived. Served with sliced tomatoes or fresh fruit, it provided a hearty breakfast or midday snack that tasted far more luxurious than its humble ingredients suggested. Families appreciated how far a carton of eggs could go when combined with a simple box of crackers, proving once again that frugal creativity brought people together over meals that nourished both body and spirit. Minute steak sandwiches gave busy 1950s homemakers a hearty meal that could be cooked and assembled in less than 10 minutes while still feeling like a treat worthy of a sit-down dinner. Thin slices of beef, known as minute steaks, were quickly seasoned with salt and pepper before being seared in a hot skillet until browned on each side. The speed of the cooking kept the meat tender and juicy while producing a rich aroma that filled the kitchen almost instantly. Buttered sandwich rolls were warmed at the edge of the pan so they absorbed the flavorful drippings, turning a simple cut of beef into something special. Many women used this recipe to satisfy hungry families on evenings when errands or social obligations cut into cooking time. Children loved the combination of soft bread and flavorful beef, and adults appreciated that the meal felt like a restaurant-style sandwich without the expense or travel. It became a weeknight classic that fit the post-war American love for quick yet substantial dinners that showcased convenience without sacrificing taste or family togetherness. Turkey Club sandwich plate turned a deli standard into a full dinner that felt hearty and fresh. Triple layers of toasted bread held slices of roasted turkey, crisp bacon, ripe tomatoes, and crunchy lettuce, each tier spread with a thin layer of mayonnaise for tang. The stack was secured with toothpicks and sliced into neat quarters, revealing colorful layers that looked as good as they tasted. A side of potato chips or a handful of pickles completed the plate, adding crunch and variety. Because it required no cooking beyond a quick toast and bacon fry, the meal came together in minutes, making it ideal for hot evenings or late nights when a stove felt out of the question. Each bite offered a balance of smoky, salty, and fresh flavors that satisfied even the hungriest diner. Families loved how it felt both casual and substantial. A dinner that borrowed the best of a classic lunch while proving that a sandwich can indeed stand proudly as the evening's main event. Quick tomato egg drop soup was a fast, practical dinner that showed up in old cookbooks for families juggling tight grocery budgets and tighter schedules. You started with hot broth, usually whatever bouillon cube or soup base you had in the cupboard. Then you poured in canned tomatoes and stirred everything together until it simmered. The final touch was whisked eggs, slowly dripped in as you stirred, turning into silky ribbons in the hot broth. It looked a little fancier than it was, but this meal was all about speed and making the best of what you had. The tomatoes added sweetness, the broth made it filling, and the eggs gave enough protein to keep everyone going. It came together in less than 10 minutes and cost next to nothing, which is exactly why old cookbooks loved it. It was warm, fast, and comforting without much effort. Families leaned on meals like this because they filled bellies and stretched paychecks at the same time. Funny how those quick little soup tricks turned into classics that still stick with people. Canned chili over saltines was the kind of quick meal that got dinner on the table fast with hardly any effort, especially when the cupboards were running bare. You opened a can of chili, heated it on the stove, and spooned it over a pile of saltine crackers. That was all there was to it. It might sound plain now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries were stretched thin, this quick, salty, filling meal showed up on plenty of kitchen tables. The saltines soaked up the chili, adding crunch and making a small amount of food go a whole lot farther. Some folks dressed it up with shredded cheese or onions if they had them, but most kept it simple and practical. You would find this recipe clipped from old magazines, scribbled in community cookbooks, or passed along by word of mouth from one busy family to the next. It was never about being fancy. It was about keeping everyone full with what little you had. Today, it is one of those forgotten meals. But for plenty of homes back then, canned chili over saltines made dinner happen fast. Quick bologna slaw sandwiches were the shortcut lunch that turned cheap deli meat and leftover dressing into something filling in almost no time. You chopped up slices of bologna, mixed them with coleslaw dressing, usually that creamy, tangy kind, and spooned the whole mixture onto soft sandwich buns. That was lunch, ready in under 10 minutes and surprisingly satisfying. This quirky little meal showed up all over Southern quick lunch cookbooks and school cafeteria menus because it was fast, affordable, and made the most of what you had on hand. Bologna was the lunch meat that never seemed to run out, and coleslaw dressing lived in the fridge way longer than you expected. Some folks added shredded cabbage or onions to stretch it further, but most kept it simple with just bologna, creamy dressing, and a soft bun. It might not sound gourmet, but when the clock was ticking and grocery money was tight, these salty, creamy sandwiches were a lifesaver. You would find the recipe scribbled on old index cards, passed around at potlucks, or tucked inside faded community cookbooks that promised quick meals when time and energy were both running low. Soda pop pound cake cups turned an ordinary boxed mix into a church picnic marvel that delighted every sweet tooth in the crowd. Home bakers poured orange soda straight into yellow cake batter, skipping milk or water, which gave the cupcakes a fragrant citrus lift and a tender crumb that stayed moist for hours. The carbonation worked magic in the oven, creating a light, airy texture, while the soda's sugar deepened the golden color of the crust. Each cupcake baked quickly in paper liners so they could be passed around to children running barefoot across the grass or packed into baskets without worry. A thin glaze of powdered sugar and a few spoonfuls of the same soda finished them off with a bright, sticky sheen that caught the sunlight and made them shine. Guests were amazed at how a single bottle of soda transformed a humble mix into something worth writing down. And cooks loved how easy it was to prepare large batches when time was short, and the fellowship hall was already buzzing with music and laughter. These little cakes were proof that a playful idea and a splash of soda could turn a simple treat into a memory of summer joy and community spirit. One-pan skillet cornbread shortcakes demonstrated how a basic Southern staple could be adapted into a speedy treat that satisfied a sweet craving without demanding a hot oven. Housewives stirred cornmeal, a little sugar, baking powder, milk, and an egg into a simple batter that could be poured into buttered muffin rings, set directly on a preheated skillet. The batter puffed and browned within minutes, creating tender cakes with crisp edges and a warm, nutty aroma. Served hot with a pat of butter or a drizzle of honey, they worked equally well for breakfast, an afternoon snack, or a quick dessert after supper. Their portability also made them perfect for children's lunches or a fast addition to a picnic basket. Because the recipe required only one pan and a few common ingredients, cleanup was minimal, a detail every busy homemaker valued. These shortcakes captured the blend of tradition and efficiency that defined mid-century kitchens, offering a taste of Southern comfort in a time frame that suited the modern post-war household. Sloppy Joe skillet brought a sweet tang to busy weeknights when there was barely time to sit, let alone cook. Ground beef hit the hot skillet first, sizzling as it browned while the cook stirred in chopped onions and a quick sauce of tomato paste, vinegar, brown sugar, and a shake of paprika. Within minutes, the mixture thickened into a rich, saucy filling that perfumed the kitchen with a scent both savory and slightly sweet. Soft sandwich rolls were split and warmed while the beef bubbled, ready to soak up every drop. The sloppy name came alive the moment the mixture met the bread, spilling deliciously over the sides and begging for napkins. Families loved how it stretched a small amount of meat across several sandwiches, and children delighted in the messy fun of every bite. Fast, filling, and friendly to any budget, the Sloppy Joe skillet earned its place as a dependable working man's dinner that felt like a small party at the table. Potted meat spread on Ritz crackers was one of those pantry dinners that proved fast, salty, and filling could all happen in under 10 minutes. You popped open a can of potted meat, scooped it straight onto Ritz crackers, and that was dinner. It could be served cold, right from the can, or warmed up if you wanted to make it feel a little fancier. But most folks just ate it plain. The creamy, salty spread paired with buttery crackers was oddly comforting, especially on busy nights or after long days when there was no time or energy to cook. Old cookbooks were packed with tricks like this, budget meals that filled you up with nothing but pantry staples and some creativity. Potted meat might not sound glamorous now, but it lasted forever in the cupboard and made dinner happen when groceries ran low. These little cracker meals were fast, filling, and made the best of tight times. Funny how a can of mystery meat and a box of crackers could still count as dinner and leave you full. Cold spaghetti with Italian dressing was one of those forgotten leftover tricks that stretched a single meal into something new without much time or money spent. You would take last night's spaghetti, rinse it off if needed, toss it in a splash of bottled Italian dressing, and that was dinner or lunch, ready in under 10 minutes. It sounds plain, but back then, this was an easy, thrifty way to keep food from going to waste and keep everyone fed. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists ran short and leftovers became the next meal. The dressing added tang, the pasta filled you up, and it all came together cold, quick, and satisfying. You would find cold spaghetti with Italian dressing scribbled in community cookbooks, passed along at potlucks, or quietly traded between neighbors looking for affordable meal ideas. Some folks tossed in vegetables or cheese if they had any left, but most kept it simple and practical. It might feel forgotten now, but back then this cold pasta salad was a staple for families trying to stretch their meals, save their money, and still have something satisfying on the table without turning on the stove. Cornbread pancakes with applesauce were the sweet, savory shortcut lunch you could pull together when the pantry looked bare, but you still wanted something warm. You grabbed a box of Jiffy cornbread mix, stirred in some water or milk, dropped spoonfuls into a hot skillet, and fried up little golden pancakes. They were crisp around the edges, soft in the center, and ready in minutes. Most folks topped them with a dollop of cold applesauce straight from the jar for that sweet, salty combination everyone quietly loved. It was a weird mix, but it worked, especially when groceries were low and creativity was high. Old-school lunch menus listed these because they were filling, fast, and cheap, making them a favorite for busy parents or frugal school cafeterias. You could dress them up with honey or butter, but the classic stayed simple: cornbread cakes with a scoop of applesauce, ready in 10 minutes flat. It was comfort food that took little effort and brought just enough sweetness to brighten a rough day. Bologna and grape jelly bites were a playful mix of sweet and savory that often surprised newcomers but quickly won them over. Thin slices of bologna were spread lightly with grape jelly rolled into tight spirals and secured with wooden toothpicks. The salty meat paired unexpectedly well with the fruity sweetness, creating a bite that was both nostalgic and exciting. These little rolls were easy to make in large batches and packed neatly into tins for travel. Children were especially drawn to their shiny purple centers and fun presentation, while adults found the combination oddly addictive once they gave it a try. They fit perfectly alongside other finger foods like deviled eggs and cheese cubes and brought a flash of color to the buffet table. This dish captured the resourceful nature of home cooks who blended humble ingredients into something festive and memorable that sparked conversation long after the last hymn faded across the sunny churchyard. Ham and pineapple toasties brought the bright sweetness of canned pineapple together with the smoky salt of sliced ham, creating a quick dish that looked elegant enough for unexpected guests while needing only minutes under the broiler. Housewives of the 1950s prized anything that could be made in 10 minutes, yet still feel special when set on the table for friends arriving after church or for a late afternoon bridge club snack. The pineapple rings came straight from the pantry, while the thin ham slices were usually left over from a weekend roast, making the recipe economical as well as fast. A simple white bread base toasted golden provided crunch and stability, while a light brushing of prepared mustard added a tang that balanced the fruit. Broiling for a few minutes melted the flavors together and filled the kitchen with a sweet, savory aroma that hinted of tropical getaways many homemakers only dreamed about. Children loved the contrast of warm fruit and salty meat, and adults enjoyed the effortless elegance that turned a weekday into a small celebration. Skillet hot dogs with onions and peppers brought the flavor of a street cart into the kitchen without the need for a grill. Hot dogs were scored and browned in a cast-iron pan, while sliced onions and bell peppers sautéed beside them in a little butter and salt. The vegetables softened and caramelized, releasing a sweetness that mingled with the smoky scent of the searing meat. Split rolls were toasted directly in the same pan to catch every bit of flavor. In less than 10 minutes, the hot dogs were nestled into the warm bread and piled high with the pepper and onion mixture, a quick dinner that felt indulgent and hearty. Families loved the one-pan cleanup and the way the dish fed a group with minimal effort. Each bite carried the taste of summer fairs and city sidewalks, proving that even a humble hot dog can become a meal worth remembering when time is short and hunger is strong. You might even see a sprinkle of pepper or a squeeze of lemon if someone was feeling bold. It came together fast, filled you up, and for those 10 minutes in the kitchen, it made you feel like you still had control over dinner. Sometimes that is all anyone needed. Minute rice with canned chili and cheese was the dinner of champions. If your definition of champion was someone who worked 12 hours and still had to put food on the table. That old minute rice box was a lifeline back then, cooking up fluffy in just a few minutes. You dumped canned chili right over the top, shredded some cheddar if you had it, and dinner was done. Nobody expected it to be gourmet, but it filled you up, stuck to your ribs, and made sure you were ready for the next shift, the next chore, the next whatever life threw at you. The cookbooks from those days leaned hard on pantry meals like this because they worked. They were honest, quick dinners that kept you standing, even when life tried to knock you down. And hey, melted cheese makes everything better. Egg salad on toast was one of those practical 10-minute meals that filled lunch boxes, fed tired workers, and showed up in every community cookbook for good reason. Leftover boiled eggs were never wasted. You chopped them up, mixed them with mayonnaise, maybe a little mustard if you were lucky, and piled it all onto a slice of toast. It sounds plain, but it got the job done. The eggs were filling, the toast made it portable, and you could whip it up in no time flat. This was not about fancy ingredients or gourmet flavors. It was the kind of recipe people leaned on when money was tight, time was short, and families still had to eat. You would see it at church luncheons, quick weekday dinners, or scribbled down on worn recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but egg salad on toast kept plenty of households going when they needed it most. Cabbage and hot dog stir-fry was the skillet lunch that popped up in every budget cookbook from the 1970s, and it stuck around because it worked. You chopped cabbage, sliced up hot dogs, threw them in a hot pan with a little oil, and stir-fried the whole thing until crispy and tender. It was salty, smoky, crunchy, and came together in under 10 minutes. This recipe lived in frugal households, school cafeterias, and quick lunch guides because it used the cheapest ingredients possible and still filled you up. Cabbage was a go-to vegetable for stretching meals, and hot dogs were always around because they lasted forever in the fridge. Toss them together, add a little pepper or hot sauce, and lunch was ready fast. Some folks added onions or garlic, but most kept it simple, just cabbage and hot dogs sizzling in the pan. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, warm, and made sure nothing went to waste when groceries were tight. Savory banana croquettes surprised picnic guests with a mix of gentle sweetness and light savory notes that turned a humble fruit into something remarkable. Ripe bananas were mashed with a pinch of salt and black pepper, then blended with fresh breadcrumbs and a spoonful of minced onion for a subtle bite. Small ovals were formed by hand, rolled in more crumbs, and fried in a shallow skillet until each croquette turned golden and crisp. The coating stayed delicately crunchy while the center remained soft and naturally sweet, a contrast that paired beautifully with roasted meats or a spoonful of spicy relish. Served warm on simple plates, these croquettes invited conversation as everyone tried to guess the unexpected ingredient hidden within. They proved that a common fruit could shine as a savory dish when seasoned with care, showing the creativity of church cooks who were never afraid to mix the familiar with the surprising to feed a joyful crowd. Creamed peas on buttered saltines turned humble ingredients into a comforting snack that fit perfectly into the fast-paced rhythm of a mid-century kitchen. A can of peas, simmered briefly with evaporated milk and a spoon of flour thickened into a silky sauce, while salted crackers were quickly buttered and warmed in the oven. The result was a bite that married the soft sweetness of peas with the crisp snap of a cracker and the richness of melted butter, a texture that felt both homey and indulgent. Housewives favored this recipe when the pantry was sparse, but an afternoon visitor required something hot to serve alongside tea or coffee. Because everything came from the shelf, it required no trip to the market, a blessing for women juggling children, chores, and unexpected company. The mild flavor also made it popular with children who sometimes turned their share into playful towers before devouring them. Simple yet satisfying, it showcased how creative cooks could transform everyday staples into something memorable in less than 10 minutes. Cabbage and sausage fry-up offered big flavor and a full stomach with almost no preparation. Pre-cooked sausage slices hit the skillet first, releasing fat and spice that would season everything to come. Thin shreds of green cabbage followed, sizzling as they met the hot pan and softening into tender ribbons that soaked up the sausage drippings. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of red pepper flakes brightened the dish, while a quick toss brought everything together in less than 10 minutes. The combination of smoky meat and sweet cabbage made each bite taste richer than its humble ingredients suggested. Served alone or with a slice of bread, it filled plates and satisfied appetites without straining the grocery budget. Working families valued the ease, but they also loved the hearty, old-world flavor that reminded them of meals once cooked slowly, now captured in minutes. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet might raise a few eyebrows today, but back then it was pure practicality in a pan. You sliced up hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and poured in a can of creamed corn. It bubbled and thickened in minutes, turning into this sweet, salty, creamy meal that filled everyone up fast. You would not find it in fancy cookbooks or glossy magazines, but you would definitely see it scribbled onto a recipe card tucked in Grandma's kitchen drawer. It made use of cheap pantry staples, stretched meat farther, and showed up on busy nights when nobody wanted to cook. Kids loved the weird sweetness, parents loved how far a can of corn could go, and it all came together in under 10 minutes. It sounds strange now, but for families watching every penny, it was comfort food that made do with what little they had. Another forgotten quick fix that quietly slipped off dinner tables over time. Peanut butter stuffed dates were a small but mighty snack that offered quick energy for children racing across the picnic grounds. Plump pitted dates were split open and carefully filled with creamy peanut butter whose salty richness balanced the natural caramel sweetness of the fruit. A light sprinkle of coarse salt or finely chopped roasted peanuts added crunch and kept the flavors lively. These little bites required no baking and could be prepared in minutes, which made them a favorite for busy church cooks already juggling dozens of dishes. The sticky sweetness clung to fingers and lips, and many children giggled as they tried to eat them neatly, while elders smiled at the familiar sight. Packed into wax paper-lined tins, they traveled perfectly and stayed fresh even in the summer heat. Adults appreciated how such a simple combination could provide lasting energy for long conversations and gospel singing deep into the evening. Every bite carried the warmth of home kitchens where mothers and grandmothers filled plates with love and thrift, turning everyday pantry staples into a treat worth remembering. Jell-O Whipped Fruit Parfait offered a colorful dessert that felt festive even on an ordinary evening, and it came together in record time thanks to the convenience of instant gelatin. A packet of flavored gelatin was dissolved in hot water and then chilled just until slightly thick before evaporated milk was whipped in to create a pale, frothy base. Housewives layered this creamy mixture with canned fruit cocktail or sliced bananas in clear glasses so every ribbon of color showed through. The result looked like something from a fancy restaurant, yet could be assembled between supper and the arrival of guests for cards or coffee. Children watched in delight as the layers jiggled and shimmered, and adults admired the light texture that melted on the tongue without being overly sweet. Because it needed only a brief chill, it was ideal for those moments when dessert was forgotten until the last minute. This quick treat captured the optimistic spirit of the 1950s, when convenience products promised elegance without effort, and every meal could end on a sparkling note. Cheeseburger. Mac Skillet turned a single pan into a complete dinner that filled plates and quieted hungry stomachs. Elbow macaroni boiled in salted water while ground beef browned in a deep skillet with chopped onions and a dusting of garlic powder. The drained pasta was folded into the sizzling meat along with a handful of shredded cheddar and a splash of milk, creating a creamy sauce as everything mingled over low heat. The smell of melting cheese and seared beef brought everyone to the kitchen before the cook could even call them. In less than 20 minutes, the dish was ready, bubbling and rich, served straight from the pan to eager bowls. Families loved how it combined the familiar taste of a cheeseburger with the comfort of macaroni and cheese, turning two favorites into one speedy supper. Leftovers reheated beautifully, though they rarely lasted long. Affordable, filling, and fun to eat, this skillet meal proved that a fast dinner could still taste like a weekend indulgence, feeding both nostalgia and appetite in every creamy, beefy bite. One-pot macaroni and tomatoes was probably the easiest dinner anyone could pull together when the cupboards were running low. You boiled up elbow macaroni, dumped in a can of stewed tomatoes, added a pat of butter if you could spare it, and that was it. It came straight from those old Depression-era cookbooks, the ones stained with years of spills and handwritten notes. This was survival food, plain and simple, but it never pretended to be more. The tomatoes gave just enough sweetness to balance the salty pasta water, and that sprinkle of black pepper over the top made it feel complete. Families leaned on meals like this because they stretched what little you had, and you could serve every last person at the table without wondering how you were going to afford groceries next week. It was quick, hot, and filled you up when you needed it most. The old cookbooks called it economical, but for most folks it was just Tuesday night. Funny how something so simple stuck around for generations. Mashed banana and mayo sandwiches might sound strange to modern ears, but back in the day, this sweet and tangy sandwich was a Southern staple that showed up in plenty of lunchboxes. You mashed up a ripe banana, spread it on soft sandwich bread, and added a swipe of mayonnaise. That was it. It was quick, cheap, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this when groceries were scarce and meals had to stretch. The banana added sweetness, the mayo gave it creaminess, and together they turned plain bread into a fast, satisfying lunch. You would find this sandwich scribbled in old community cookbooks, passed down at church picnics, or tucked into handwritten recipe boxes that lived in kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of folks growing up during hard times, this odd little sandwich was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight and hunger was knocking. Celery boats with peanut butter and raisins were the fun lunch that every old-school cookbook claimed kids would love, even though most kids quietly picked off the raisins when no one was looking. You sliced celery into sticks, filled the groove with peanut butter, and dotted them with raisins, proudly calling them ants on a log. It came together in 2 minutes flat, looked cute, and somehow counted as lunch when the cupboards were nearly empty. Parents loved it because it was quick, frugal, and felt just healthy enough to avoid the guilt of another peanut butter sandwich. It was simple, crunchy, a little salty, and just filling enough to buy you some time before dinner. Some families swapped the raisins for nuts, dried cranberries, or chocolate chips when they wanted to shake things up, but the basic version stuck around for decades. You would find this recipe tucked into picnic cookbooks, school lunch guides, and old magazines promising fun, budget-friendly meals made with whatever happened to be in the fridge. It was not flashy, but it made celery a little less boring, and for families watching their grocery bills, that was good enough. Ginger ale, ice cream float pie turned a favorite soda shop treat into a picnic-ready dessert. A graham cracker crust was pressed firmly into a pie pan and chilled while vanilla ice cream softened slightly on the counter. The ice cream was then mixed with bubbly ginger ale until smooth and lightly frothy, creating a creamy filling with a gentle spice and fizz. This mixture was poured into the crust and left to firm in the icebox until ready to serve. Just before cutting, a thin layer of whipped cream was spread across the top and sprinkled with crushed ginger snaps for extra crunch. Each slice tasted like an old-fashioned float, cool and sweet with a hint of ginger warmth. Because it required no baking and could be prepared hours ahead, it became a go-to dessert for hot summer gatherings. Children loved the effervescent flavor, while adults appreciated the nostalgic nod to soda fountain days. It captured the playful side of church picnics, where families mingled under the trees and every dish held a touch of celebration. Celery cream soup. Shortcut gave homemakers a comforting bowl of soup with almost no effort, turning pantry staples into a warm meal suitable for lunch or a light supper. A can of condensed cream of celery soup was combined with an equal measure of milk and whisked over gentle heat until smooth and steaming. A small knob of butter and a dash of white pepper added richness without extending the cooking time. Housewives often served the soup with crackers or a slice of toasted bread, creating a balanced dish that felt nurturing on chilly evenings. Because it relied on ingredients that were easy to keep on hand, it became a dependable choice when groceries were low or unexpected guests appeared. The soft green hue and delicate aroma brought a hint of freshness to the table, even in winter months when produce was scarce. In just a few minutes, a humble can and a splash of milk transformed into a meal that soothed families and showcased the quiet ingenuity of the mid-century kitchen. Chicken fried rice with canned chicken delivered a satisfying stir-fry that used pantry staples to create takeout flavor in record time. Day-old rice separated beautifully in a hot skillet coated with a thin film of oil, each grain absorbing the smoky heat. Diced onions, carrots, and peas added color and sweetness, sizzling as they released their fragrance. A can of cooked chicken provided tender meat with no extra prep, breaking apart into savory shreds that mingled with the vegetables. A quick splash of soy sauce and a sprinkle of garlic powder tied everything together, while scrambled eggs folded in at the end brought richness and body. The result was a meal that tasted carefully crafted yet came together in less than 15 minutes, perfect for evenings when energy ran low but appetites ran high. Families loved how it stretched a small amount of protein across several generous portions while clearing the fridge of leftover rice. Each spoonful offered the comfort of home and the excitement of a restaurant favorite, a reminder that great flavor does not require a long list of fresh ingredients when skill and heat meet simple planning. Leftover rice with creamed spinach was one of those pantry meals that turned odds and ends into something filling, warm, and fast. You scooped leftover rice into a skillet, stirred in canned creamed spinach, and added a splash of milk or cheese if you had any left. Everything cooked together until hot, and that was dinner. It was creamy, salty, and just filling enough to count when there was not much else in the cupboard. These little skillet meals showed up in old cookbooks because they stretched groceries, made dinner happen fast, and kept families full during lean times. You could eat it plain, add black pepper, or even crack an egg on top if you wanted to feel fancy, but most folks just scooped it onto a plate and called it a night. This meal did not take much: leftovers, canned greens, and a little creativity, and somehow it got everyone fed. Funny how these quick, practical dinners stick with you long after times get easier. Green bean and egg salad was one of those quick, cold meals that filled plates fast and stretched what little food families had during tough times. You opened a can of green beans, sliced up some boiled eggs, tossed it all together with mayonnaise, and that was it. A little creamy, a little savory, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might not sound fancy today, but back then, this quick salad showed up at church potlucks, summer picnics, and weekday lunches when the pantry was running low. The eggs added protein, the beans filled you up, and the mayo brought it all together in a creamy, satisfying bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because they used simple ingredients that were always on hand and turned them into meals that kept everyone fed. You would find this one scribbled in old cookbooks, passed along by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of quick meal fixes. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of families back then, green bean and egg salad was a go-to plate that saved time, money, and groceries. Quick oatmeal. Drop cookies gave families a warm, homemade treat without the long wait or complicated steps of traditional baking. Rolled oats were stirred with brown sugar, softened shortening, and a splash of milk until a sticky dough formed that could be dropped by spoonfuls onto a baking sheet. Because the cookies baked in just a few minutes, the kitchen quickly filled with the comforting aroma of toasted oats and caramelized sugar. Housewives relied on this recipe when children returned from school hungry, or when unexpected guests arrived and a sweet bite was needed fast. The chewy texture and simple flavor appealed to everyone, and the recipe was easy enough that older children could help with mixing and scooping. Served with a glass of cold milk, these cookies brought an old-fashioned warmth to even the busiest day. Their speed and reliability made them a beloved staple in countless mid-century households where homemade goodness was always within reach. Country ham and red-eye gravy brought a bold, salty kick to the end of a long day, drawing on traditions that went back generations. Thin slices of country ham hit a hot skillet and sizzled until their edges crisped and their smoky scent filled the kitchen. Once the meat was removed, strong black coffee was poured into the pan to deglaze the savory bits, blending with a splash of water and a touch of butter to create the dark, rich gravy that gave the dish its name. The result was a sauce both bitter and savory, perfect for spooning over the ham or soaking into warm biscuits. In less than 15 minutes, the table held a meal that tasted slow, cooked, and soulful. Working families appreciated the speed while still honoring a Southern classic, and the sharp aroma of coffee and ham became a sign that dinner was ready. Each bite balanced salt, smoke, and a subtle bitterness, a reminder of farmhouse suppers where nothing was wasted and flavor came from skill and tradition rather than expensive ingredients. Cottage cheese and pineapple plates were the go-to for a light summer dinner when turning on the stove felt like punishment. You would scoop a generous mound of cottage cheese onto your plate, plop some pineapple rings or chunks right alongside, and maybe toss in a saltine cracker or two if you were feeling fancy. That was dinner. It sounds a little strange now, but back then it was right there in every old cookbook promising quick, budget-friendly meals that helped stretch the pantry and beat the heat. It was cold, creamy, and sweet. The kind of meal that made sure you stayed full without sweating over a hot skillet. For families trying to get by on tight paychecks, it was a lifesaver. And somehow, that odd combination of tangy cottage cheese and syrupy pineapple rings actually worked. It might not win any culinary awards today, but during those lean years, it was exactly the kind of practical magic you needed. Maple-flavored sweet potato cakes filled the air with the scent of warm syrup and earthy roots. Instant mashed sweet potatoes were combined with a splash of milk, a dusting of cinnamon, and a drizzle of maple flavoring to form a smooth batter. Small scoops of this mixture were dropped onto a hot griddle and flattened gently with the back of a spoon. Within minutes, the cakes developed a golden crust while remaining tender inside. A quick brush of melted butter and a second drizzle of maple syrup created a glistening glaze that caught the afternoon sunlight. These cakes were hearty enough to serve as a main dish or as a sweet side alongside fried chicken and collard greens. Children loved their pancake-like texture, and adults appreciated how fast and affordable they were to make. They proved that even instant ingredients could become something special when guided by skilled hands and a desire to nourish a community gathered in faith and fellowship beneath the wide blue sky of a summer afternoon. Instant tapioca custard cups captured the thrill of modern convenience with a dessert that seemed elegant despite being ready in minutes. Pearl tapioca simmered gently in sweetened milk until translucent and thick, creating a base that was smooth yet delightfully textured. Beaten egg yolks were whisked in near the end for a gentle richness, while a splash of vanilla provided a warm aroma that drifted through the kitchen. Housewives spooned the custard into small cups and set them in the refrigerator, where they cooled quickly enough to serve after supper without hours of waiting. The tiny pearls offered a playful pop that fascinated children, while adults savored the silky creaminess. Because the ingredients were inexpensive and kept well in the pantry, it became a reliable last-minute dessert for unexpected guests or sudden cravings. Served plain or with a sprinkling of grated nutmeg, it brought a touch of old-fashioned charm to the modern mid-century table and showcased how quick cooking products could create something memorable and delicious. Beef and onion sandwich spread proved that deli leftovers could turn into a hearty supper in almost no time. Thin slices of roast beef, whether from a weekend dinner or the grocery counter, were chopped fine and folded into a bowl of mayonnaise and diced onions. A splash of Worcestershire sauce and a pinch of black pepper added depth, while the onions provided crunch and a sharp bite. The mixture chilled for just a few minutes while bread toasted and plates were set. Then it was piled thick between slices of rye or soft white sandwich bread. Some families liked a layer of crisp lettuce for freshness, while others spooned the spread onto crackers for an easy snack that still felt like a meal. It stretched a small amount of beef into several servings, saving both time and money while still tasting indulgent. Each bite combined creamy texture with savory meat and a gentle onion heat, the kind of simple pleasure that keeps everyone coming back for seconds. Quick to make, rich to eat, this spread turned odds and ends into a dinner worth remembering, proving that thrift and flavor can happily share the same table. Ketchup fried rice was one of those odd shortcut dinners that turned pantry scraps into something hot and surprisingly satisfying. You started with cold leftover rice, tossed it in a hot skillet with chopped onions, and stirred in a few big spoonfuls of ketchup. That was it. If you had leftover meat like ham or chicken, you diced it up and threw it in too. It was tangy, salty, a little sweet, and filled you up fast when there was not much else in the fridge. This recipe showed up in old cookbooks from the 1950s through the 70s, a quirky little trick that stretched leftovers and made dinner happen in 10 minutes flat. It was not fancy, but it worked, especially for families juggling tight paychecks and even tighter grocery lists. You might not see ketchup fried rice on menus today, but back then, it was a practical fix for busy nights and bare pantries. It turned scraps into something warm, filling, and oddly comforting. Funny how the strangest combinations sometimes stick with us the longest. Quick ham salad on saltines was the fast fix lunch that made diced ham, mayo, and a little pickle relish stretch way further than you would think. You chopped leftover ham, mixed it with mayonnaise and relish, and spooned it onto a stack of crackers. That was lunch, done in minutes and surprisingly filling. Old cookbooks loved this recipe for being cheap, easy, and portable, which is why it kept popping up in school lunch guides and picnic sections. You could dress it up with celery or onions, but most families kept it simple with just ham, mayo, and a little crunch. It might not look like much, but it worked when you needed protein, salt, and something satisfying without standing over a stove. The saltines soaked up just enough moisture, the ham salad added creaminess, and together it passed for lunch, even when the fridge was running low. tomato aspic salad squares brought a savory twist to the mid-century love affair with gelatin, turning a simple tomato base into a striking dish for buffet tables. Housewives dissolved unflavored gelatin in seasoned tomato juice, adding a splash of lemon juice and a pinch of celery salt for brightness. Once set in a shallow pan, the firm red sheet was cut into tidy cubes or squares and arranged on lettuce leaves for serving. The cool, slightly tart bites provided a refreshing contrast to rich meats and creamy side dishes often found at potlucks or holiday spreads. Because the aspic could be made well in advance and required no last-minute attention, it became a dependable choice for hostesses who wanted both beauty and practicality. Guests admired the jewel-like appearance and the unexpected savory flavor that lingered lightly on the tongue. This recipe reflected the era's fascination with molded salads and the desire to transform everyday ingredients into something elegant with little effort or expense. Shrimp and grits. Quick Bowl delivered coastal comfort with pantry convenience, turning pre-cooked shrimp and instant grits into a 10-minute feast. Water boiled while butter melted in a skillet, where garlic and a pinch of paprika released a smoky aroma. The shrimp, already cooked and cleaned, were tossed in the sizzling butter until warmed through and lightly seasoned with lemon juice. Instant grits whisked in another pot thickened in minutes, creamy and soft with a touch of salt. The hot grits were spooned into bowls and topped with the buttery shrimp and their flavorful drippings. A sprinkle of chopped green onions or parsley added a fresh finish. Despite the short cooking time, the dish tasted like a slow weekend brunch by the shore. Families loved how it brought a touch of luxury to a busy weeknight, proving that quick meals could still feel special and deeply satisfying when simple ingredients were treated with care and attention. Sautéed canned corn and scrambled eggs was the kind of meal you whipped up when the pantry looked bare, but you still wanted dinner to taste halfway decent. It came together in 10 minutes flat. You drained a can of sweet corn, tossed it in a skillet with butter, and let it sizzle until the kernels softened and browned just a little around the edges. Then you cracked in a few eggs, scrambled them together, and dinner was done before anyone could ask what was cooking. Old cookbooks loved recipes like this because they were fast, cheap, and practical. You could eat it plain or sprinkle on some salt and pepper to dress it up. The sweetness of the corn with the soft, buttery eggs made a surprisingly good combination. It was filling enough to pass for dinner, but easy enough to feel like you barely lifted a finger. These were the meals that stretched the grocery budget, kept families full, and made sure nobody went to bed hungry. It might not have been fancy, but back then, fancy was never the goal. Getting by was. Baked bean toasties were the kind of quick, hearty meal you could throw together with just a few ingredients and still feel like you had something warm and filling on the table. You toasted up some sandwich bread, heated a can of baked beans, and spooned them over the top with a sprinkle of shredded cheddar if you had it. It sounds basic, but when you were short on groceries and stretched for time, this meal worked wonders. The beans were filling, the toast added crunch, and the cheese made it all feel a little more special. You would see this simple meal show up in New England kitchens, packed into lunchboxes, or scribbled into old cookbooks full of fast, affordable recipes. It was not about being fancy, it was about getting something hot and satisfying on the table in under 10 minutes. Today, people might forget how handy meals like this were, but back then, baked bean toasties filled a lot of hungry bellies without breaking the bank. Egg and ketchup stir-fry over rice was the no-fuss pantry lunch that every family had in their back pocket when groceries were running low but bellies still needed filling. You cracked a couple of eggs into a pan, scrambled them up with a little oil, added a squirt of ketchup, and poured the whole thing over leftover rice. That was it. Done in under 10 minutes, salty, tangy, and surprisingly satisfying for something so simple. Kids loved it because it tasted like breakfast and lunch at the same time, with just enough of that sweet ketchup kick to keep things interesting. Parents leaned on it because it used what they already had in the kitchen. Eggs, rice, and ketchup were always hanging around. Some families added soy sauce, scallions, or even a slice of processed cheese to stretch it further, but most kept it basic and fast. You could find this recipe scribbled in lunch guides, tucked inside old homemaker cookbooks, or passed along by neighbors who knew how to stretch leftovers into a real meal. It was not fancy, but it filled you up when time and money were tight. Pickled watermelon rind. Relish turned what many would throw away into a bright, tangy condiment that lifted every sandwich on the table. After the sweet red fruit was eaten, the firm white rinds were peeled, cubed, and simmered with vinegar, sugar, mustard seeds, and a pinch of cinnamon until they softened, yet kept a pleasant bite. The mixture was packed into jars and chilled, developing a flavor that balanced sweet and sour with a whisper of spice. On picnic day, it was spooned over pulled pork sandwiches, spread across hot biscuits, or served alongside fried fish, where its crispness cut through the richness perfectly. Elders smiled, remembering how this recipe saved money and honored a tradition of wasting nothing, while younger guests were amazed that something so flavorful could come from what most considered scraps. Its bright yellow-green color and lively taste made it a star of the condiment table and a story every cook was proud to share. This relish captured the resourceful spirit of the 1960s church kitchen, where creativity and care transformed humble leftovers into something truly delicious. Malted chocolate egg cream brought the magic of a soda fountain into the home kitchen with a drink that felt indulgent, yet needed only minutes to prepare. Chocolate syrup and malted milk powder were whisked with a splash of cold milk until smooth, then topped with a vigorous pour of chilled seltzer that created a frothy head. Despite the name, no egg was used, just the airy foam that gave it a playful charm. Children marveled at the bubbles while adults enjoyed a nostalgic taste of their own youthful trips to corner drugstore counters. Housewives loved how easily the ingredients could be kept on hand, and how quickly the drink came together when a sweet craving struck. Served in tall glasses with paper straws, it turned an ordinary afternoon into a celebration and reminded everyone of carefree days. This quick fountain-style treat captured the hopeful, fun-loving spirit of the 1950s and showed how simple pantry items could deliver a true taste of happiness. Salisbury steak patties with gravy mix offered a hearty plate in minutes, transforming ground beef into something that tasted like a slow Sunday supper. Lean beef was seasoned with onion powder, garlic, and a splash of Worcestershire, then shaped into oval patties and seared in a skillet until crisp on the outside and juicy inside. While the meat browned, a packet of instant brown gravy whisked together with water created a smooth sauce in a separate pan. Once the patties were done, they were nestled into the bubbling gravy for a final simmer that coated them in rich flavor. Served over mashed potatoes or buttered toast, the meal felt far more elaborate than the clock revealed. Working parents loved the speed and the hearty comfort, while children scooped up every drop of gravy with the last crust of bread. It was a dinner that turned a simple pound of beef into something warm, filling, and memorable, the kind of dish that proves convenience and care can live on the same plate. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet was one of those meals that showed up when time was short and the cupboards looked bare. You sliced up those hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and let them simmer in a can of creamed corn until everything bubbled together. It sounds a little ridiculous now, but back then, it was comfort food at its most practical. This was not a recipe out of some fancy magazine. It came straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that every kitchen drawer seemed to have. Families on tight budgets loved it because it made use of pantry staples, and somehow, that sweet corn and salty hot dog combination worked. You could dress it up with black pepper or a little hot sauce, but most folks kept it plain. After a long day, this dinner showed up in 10 minutes flat, filling your belly even if your wallet felt empty. Funny how those quick meals stick with you long after the hard times pass. Hot dog and baked bean skillet was one of those quirky 10-minute meals that could only have come from Grandma's old cookbook. You sliced up hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and poured in a can of baked beans. That was it. Dinner done. It sounds ridiculous now, but back when money was tight and every meal counted, this was comfort food at its quickest. The beans were filling, the hot dogs gave you just enough protein, and you could stretch one can to feed the whole family. Some folks got fancy with mustard or onions, but most kept it plain. It was the kind of dish that showed up after a long workday, when you were too tired to fuss with complicated recipes but still needed to put something on the table. It bubbled away on the stove, filling the kitchen with that warm, smoky smell that meant dinner was ready. Today, it feels like one of those meals we forgot on purpose, but for families back then, it was a lifesaver that showed up fast and kept bellies full. Creamed corn and egg skillet was one of those weirdly satisfying lunches that showed up when the fridge was nearly empty and time was running short. You would grab a can of creamed corn, crack in a few eggs, and fry everything together in one pan. It sounds questionable now, but for families back then, it was warm, savory, and fast. Ready in minutes when kids came home hungry or dad's lunch break was short. It usually got served with plain white toast or leftover biscuits, soaking up every last bit of that creamy, buttery mess. Some folks added black pepper or a sprinkle of shredded cheese, but most kept it plain because that is what was in the cupboard. It was not glamorous, and nobody was putting this on a restaurant menu, but in old cookbooks it was listed right next to the hearty quick meals section. That is how you knew it worked. Orange gelatin soufflé. Cups brought a cheerful glow to every picnic spread. Instant pudding was whipped together with gelatin and a splash of fresh orange juice until it became light and airy. The mixture was poured into individual cups and chilled until softly set, forming a dessert that looked like a true soufflé, but required no oven at all. When served, the cups revealed a pale orange hue and a delicate citrus scent that lifted spirits on even the warmest days. Topped with a dollop of lightly sweetened whipped cream, they offered a smooth, creamy bite that melted instantly on the tongue. Churchgoers admired how quickly these treats could be prepared while still looking fancy enough for a special gathering. Children loved the bright color and gentle wobble that made each spoonful fun, while adults found the flavor refreshingly light after a plateful of savory dishes. This dessert proved that with a few pantry staples and a bit of creativity, even the simplest recipe could bring joy to a crowd gathered in faith and friendship. Sardine and celery canapés gave 1950s homemakers a way to serve a sophisticated bite without spending precious time in the kitchen. Canned sardines were mashed with finely chopped celery and a dash of lemon juice, creating a creamy yet crisp filling that could be spread on small squares of rye or wheat bread. The mixture provided a boost of protein and a briny flavor that felt upscale compared to typical sandwiches. Because the fish came ready to eat and the celery added instant freshness, the entire snack could be prepared during the time it took coffee to brew. Hostesses appreciated the elegant look of neatly arranged canapés on a platter, and guests were often surprised by how satisfying such a simple preparation could be. The contrast of the soft sardine spread and the crunch of fresh celery made every bite interesting. This quick recipe reflected the growing American taste for continental flavors while staying firmly rooted in the frugality and efficiency prized by housewives of the era. Ham and cheese biscuit sandwiches turned leftovers into a satisfying handheld meal that tasted like a weekend treat even on the busiest night. Flaky biscuits baked from a can or quickly mixed from scratch rose high in the oven while slices of baked ham warmed in a skillet. As soon as the biscuits were golden, they were split open and layered with the savory ham and slices of sharp cheddar or mild American cheese. A few minutes back in the warm oven melted the cheese into a gooey blanket that glued everything together. The salty ham, buttery biscuit, and rich cheese made a perfect combination that required no side dish and no long wait. For families coming home late, this sandwich was both supper and comfort, a way to turn yesterday's roast into tonight's fast feast. Children grabbed them hot from the tray, and the memory of that warm bite remains an echo of efficiency and home-style pleasure. Salmon and canned pea toasts were how you made pantry food look halfway fancy when the clock and your energy ran out. You took canned salmon, mashed it with mayonnaise, stirred in some peas, and spread it thick over hot toast. That was dinner. It sounds simple now, but when fresh meat was scarce or paychecks were tight, this was the kind of meal that kept families going. The old cookbooks were filled with little tricks like this, ways to stretch canned goods into something that almost felt special. Salmon from a can never fooled anyone, but the crunch of toast and the soft peas made it oddly satisfying. Tomato soup with cracker crumble was the ultimate quick fix when groceries were low and appetites were high. You heated up a can of tomato soup, crushed some saltines over the top, and called it a meal. It sounds basic, but it hit the spot. Grandma's cookbook was full of these quick, practical recipes that stretched every last pantry staple, and this one was no exception. The saltines soaked up the soup, adding just enough crunch and thickness to make it filling. Parents loved it because it cost next to nothing and came together in 10 minutes flat. Kids loved it because it was warm, salty, and familiar. You could always dress it up with a sprinkle of cheese or some pepper, but most families kept it plain and simple. It was the kind of meal you would find after school, in chilly weather, or on those nights when there just was not time for anything else. Fast, affordable, and quietly forgotten, like so many of the recipes tucked into the back pages of Grandma's old cookbook. Apricot cottage cheese loaf offered a cool and creamy surprise that stood out among the many church picnic dishes of the 1960s. Slices of soft white bread were spread with a light mixture of whipped cottage cheese blended until smooth with a dash of sugar and a few drops of lemon for brightness. Sweet canned apricots were drained carefully, then chopped into small pieces and folded into the cheese to add a gentle fruitiness. Each slice was rolled tightly into a neat spiral, then wrapped in wax paper and chilled until firm. When unwrapped at the picnic, the loaf revealed beautiful golden swirls against the snowy filling, and each piece sliced cleanly without losing its shape. The taste balanced mild, tangy cheese with the soft sweetness of apricot, creating a refreshing bite that was neither too heavy nor too sweet for a summer afternoon. It traveled well in coolers packed with ice, making it a practical choice for long drives to countryside gatherings where families sang hymns and shared stories beneath tall oak trees. Children loved the bright colors, while adults enjoyed how this loaf brought a touch of elegance to the long wooden tables filled with beloved recipes passed from generation to generation. Spam and pickle pinwheels turned an everyday pantry meat into a cheerful party snack that disappeared almost as quickly as it was made. Minced spam was mixed with chopped sweet pickles and a touch of mayonnaise, then spread thinly over slices of soft white bread. Each slice was rolled up tightly and cut into bite-sized spirals that showed off a colorful swirl when arranged on a plate. Hostesses loved that these pinwheels could be prepared in advance and required no stove or oven, making them perfect for summer afternoons or unexpected visitors. The salty richness of the meat, balanced by the tang of the pickle, gave each bite a lively flavor that children and adults both enjoyed. Because the recipe used inexpensive shelf-stable ingredients, it fit neatly into the frugal yet celebratory spirit of the decade. In just a few minutes, a plain loaf of bread and a can of meat became a platter of pretty, savory bites, ready for any occasion from a backyard gathering to a bridge club meeting. Egg and potato. Hash turned scraps into a filling supper that could be on the table before the day's stories were finished. Leftover boiled potatoes were diced and tossed into a hot skillet with a bit of butter until their edges crisped to a golden brown. Eggs were cracked directly over the sizzling potatoes, their yolks breaking to coat each bite in a rich sauce as they cooked. A sprinkle of salt, pepper, and maybe a dash of paprika was all it needed. The aroma of frying potatoes and eggs promised satisfaction and thrift, a meal built from yesterday's extras and today's needs. Served straight from the pan, the hash invited everyone to eat family style, forks clinking as the steam rose. It proved that speed never had to sacrifice comfort, and that the best dinners often came from making the most of what was already on hand. Fried bologna and mashed potato bowls were what happened when leftovers met desperation, in the best way. Bologna was cheap, salty, and easy to fry up in a hot pan until the edges curled just right and got that crispy golden ring. Leftover mashed potatoes were scooped into a bowl, topped with the hot bologna, and if you were lucky, drowned in ketchup, gravy, or whatever sauce was hiding in the fridge. It was not about being fancy. This was survival food pulled straight from those old creased cookbooks every family tucked away in the kitchen drawer, the ones stained with coffee rings and margarine smudges. No one expected it to be restaurant-worthy, but that salty bite of bologna with creamy potatoes stuck to your ribs after a long, hard day. It filled you up fast and made use of whatever scraps were left from last night's dinner. When you only had 10 minutes and not a penny to spare, this meal was a lifesaver. Mayo and lettuce sandwiches were one of those simple, no-nonsense Depression-era meals that somehow filled you up when there was not much else to work with. You slapped some mayonnaise on soft sandwich bread, added a few crisp iceberg lettuce leaves, and called it lunch. That was it. It might sound plain today, but back when grocery shelves were bare and paychecks were stretched thin, this quick little meal showed up on a lot of kitchen tables. Families made do with what they had, and mayonnaise gave the sandwich some fat and flavor while lettuce added crunch and made it feel fresh. It was cheap, fast, and surprisingly satisfying when times were tough. You would see it scribbled onto old recipe cards or passed down through word of mouth as a quick lunch fix that cost next to nothing. These sandwiches are mostly forgotten now, but back then, they were a lifesaver that came together in under 10 minutes. Fried bologna with mustard on toast was the quick stovetop lunch that somehow managed to taste better than it had any right to. You sliced bologna, tossed it in a hot pan, watched it curl up at the edges, and slapped it on toasted bread with a smear of yellow mustard. That was it. Lunch in under 10 minutes. It was salty, tangy, crispy around the edges, and showed up everywhere from lunch counters to kitchen tables when the grocery list was running short. Bologna was cheap, lasted forever in the fridge, and frying it gave it just enough of a glow-up to make it feel like more than sandwich meat. Some folks added a slice of cheese or swapped in rye bread, but the classic stayed simple and fast. Fried bologna with mustard was not glamorous, but it hit the spot when you needed something filling, salty, and satisfying without much effort. It was a staple in school lunchrooms, factory break rooms, and busy homes, sticking around because it was affordable, reliable, and always ready when the clock was ticking. Prune and walnut pinwheels combined natural sweetness with hearty texture in a cookie that seemed far fancier than its humble origins. Pitted prunes were simmered briefly and mashed into a smooth paste, sweetened with a touch of honey and a splash of lemon juice. Chopped walnuts were stirred in for a pleasant crunch. This filling was spread across a sheet of tender pastry dough which was rolled tightly into a log and chilled until firm. Slices were cut into neat spirals and baked until golden brown, filling the air with a warm, fruity aroma. The finished pinwheels offered a balance of rich nuts and mellow fruit that paired beautifully with coffee or sweet tea. They packed well in tins lined with wax paper and stayed moist even after a day in the summer heat. Elders appreciated their old-world flavor, while younger guests enjoyed the pretty swirls and chewy bite. These cookies represented the care and creativity of home bakers who turned simple dried fruit and pantry staples into something elegant enough for any church gathering. Egg salad stuffed tomatoes brought garden freshness to the table with a clever presentation that looked elegant without extra work. Hard-boiled eggs were quickly chopped and mixed with mayonnaise, mustard, and a pinch of salt to create a creamy salad. Plump tomatoes were cored and hollowed to form natural cups that cradled the filling, turning an everyday mixture into a dish fit for a luncheon or afternoon tea. Because both eggs and tomatoes were inexpensive and widely available, this recipe became a staple for families seeking a light but satisfying meal. Housewives appreciated how the cool salad contrasted with the juicy tomato walls, creating a refreshing bite ideal for warm evenings when turning on the stove was unwelcome. Guests admired the colorful presentation, and children often enjoyed eating the tomato shells like bowls. With only a few minutes of effort, this simple combination turned common staples into a dish that looked far more elaborate than its humble ingredients suggested. Creamed peas on toast turned a bag of frozen peas and a little flour into a fast dinner that warmed the evening. Butter melted in a skillet while a spoonful of flour was whisked in to make a smooth roux. Then milk streamed in to form a creamy sauce. The peas went straight from freezer to pan, bright green against the pale gravy as they softened and released their sweetness. Thick slices of bread toasted in the same pan or under a quick broiler became the foundation, soaking up the sauce while staying crisp at the edges. A sprinkle of black pepper and a pinch of nutmeg gave the dish surprising depth, proof that simple pantry ingredients could still feel indulgent. Families loved how it filled plates in less than 10 minutes and cost almost nothing, making it a dependable weeknight standby. Children liked the mild flavor and the fun of cutting through the soft bread with a fork, while adults found comfort in its quiet, creamy richness. One bite carried the memory of suppers built on thrift and ingenuity, a reminder that speed and satisfaction can share the same plate when time and money are scarce, but hunger is real. Peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches were one of those simple little joys that made their way into school lunches, church picnics, and kitchen tables across America. It did not take much. Just some soft sandwich bread, a good swipe of creamy peanut butter, and a generous helping of marshmallow fluff right out of the jar. The whole thing came together in under 10 minutes, but it stuck with you longer than that. It was sweet, sticky, and packed with that gooey marshmallow center that kids could not get enough of. Adults loved how fast and affordable it was, especially when grocery budgets were tight. You would spot this recipe scribbled on note cards, tucked into church cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth from one busy home cook to another. It was a sugar rush, sure, but it was also a reminder of the quick comfort food that helped families stretch what they had. Funny how something that fast and that fun could quietly disappear from kitchen tables over time. Rice and egg bowls with soy sauce were the thrift store cookbook lunch that turned leftovers into something hot, salty, and satisfying in minutes. You grabbed leftover rice, tossed it in a pan, cracked in an egg, scrambled everything together, and finished with a dash of soy sauce. It was quick, filling, and one of the smartest ways to stretch pantry basics into lunch. Old, thrifty meal guides loved this recipe because it used stuff already sitting in your fridge and came together in under 10 minutes. Some folks added chopped scallions or a little sesame oil, but the classic stayed simple: rice, egg, and soy sauce, fried up fast. It was a go-to for busy parents, college students, or anyone making do with leftovers and a tight grocery budget. The rice got crispy around the edges, the egg brought protein, and the soy sauce pulled it all together. It might not win awards for presentation, but it filled you up and tasted good when you needed a cheap, fast lunch. Raspberry vinegar. Spritzer refreshed thirsty guests with a balance of sweet fruit and tangy bite that felt both old-fashioned and new. Church ladies steeped fresh raspberries in cider vinegar and sugar for several days, creating a ruby-red shrub syrup that sparkled like stained glass in the sunlight. When picnic day arrived, they strained the mixture and poured it over tall glasses of crushed ice, then topped each serving with cool well water or fizzy mineral water. The first sip was brisk and lively, tart enough to wake the senses yet mellowed by the natural sweetness of the berries. Children loved the jewel color, while adults appreciated how the drink cut through the richness of fried chicken and buttery casseroles spread across the tables. Because it required only a few ingredients and could be made well ahead, it became a trusted recipe for gatherings where people lingered for hours in the summer heat. It carried the gentle memory of colonial shrubs and old kitchen wisdom, a link between generations that reminded everyone how simple ingredients could create something remarkable and worth passing on with pride. Pimiento cheese celery boats offered a bright and crunchy appetizer that required almost no effort, yet brought cheerful color to any mid-century table. Housewives mixed shredded sharp cheddar cheese with diced pimientos and mayonnaise until a smooth spread formed, adjusting the seasoning with a pinch of salt and a dash of mild paprika. Sturdy celery ribs were cut into neat lengths and filled with the mixture, creating a crisp base that contrasted with the creamy filling. The red flecks of pimiento against the pale cheese and green celery made each piece look like a small celebration, ideal for bridge club gatherings or last-minute company. Because every ingredient could be stored in the refrigerator or pantry, this dish became a reliable standby for evenings when unexpected guests arrived. Children enjoyed the crunch and mild flavor, while adults appreciated the nostalgic taste that reminded them of Southern luncheons. This quick recipe captured the 1950s fascination with colorful presentation and easy preparation, turning a handful of ordinary ingredients into something party-ready in minutes without heating the oven. Texas chili dog plate made a hearty, messy dinner that satisfied every craving after a long workday. Hot dogs sizzled in a skillet while a can of chili warmed on the stove with a spoonful of cumin and smoked paprika to deepen the flavor. Soft buns were split and toasted lightly, ready to hold the hot dogs as soon as they browned. The steaming chili was spooned generously over each dog, followed by shredded cheddar and a scatter of diced onions for bite. The smell of spice and smoke filled the kitchen, drawing everyone to the table before the last dog was dressed. Each plate was a cheerful mess, requiring extra napkins and rewarding every bite with a mix of textures and flavors. It was inexpensive, quick and filling, perfect for nights when there was little time but big appetites. The combination of tender bun, juicy sausage, and rich chili sauce made this simple dish a lasting favorite in households that valued both speed and flavor. Spam and egg scramble was one of those 10-minute dinners that showed up again and again when times got lean. You diced up a can of Spam, fried it in a hot skillet until the edges curled and crisped, then scrambled in a few eggs with onions if they were around. It all came together fast, filled your plate, and made sure nobody went to bed hungry. Spam was a pantry staple for a reason. Cheap, shelf-stable, and surprisingly versatile. The old cookbooks were full of ways to stretch it into something that felt like a real meal. Toss in eggs, and suddenly, dinner looked good enough to serve without apology. It was salty, hearty, and loaded with that familiar taste of making do with what you had. Families leaned on quick meals like this because they worked. 10 minutes on the stove, a hot plate in front of everyone, and dinner was done. No one claimed it was fancy, but when your pantry was empty and the paycheck still days away, it tasted like a small victory. Funny how those simple, practical meals stuck with us. They filled the gaps and filled us up. Mayonnaise and pineapple salad might sound odd now, but back in Grandma's day, it was one of those quirky little recipes that everyone knew how to throw together in minutes. You grabbed a can of pineapple slices, plopped them on a plate, added a dollop of mayonnaise, and sprinkled on shredded cheddar if you had it. It was sweet, tangy, creamy, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added a cherry on top to dress it up, but most kept it plain and practical. You would see this salad at potlucks, church socials, or as a quick side dish on busy weeknights when dinner needed help stretching. It was fast, used ingredients people always had around, and filled that gap between sweet and savory in a way that only vintage recipes could. Today, people might wrinkle their noses at the thought, but back then, it was a 10-minute solution to hungry families and empty cupboards. Another forgotten gem from the cookbook that kept so many homes running. Pimiento cheese sandwiches on white bread were the Southern lunchbox staple that quietly made their way into kitchens across the country. You made up a big batch of pimiento cheese, usually shredded cheddar, mayo, and little diced pimiento peppers, then slapped it between slices of soft sandwich bread. That was lunch, fast and done. If you were lucky, the batch had been chilling in the fridge overnight so the flavors had time to settle. It showed up everywhere, from school cafeterias to Sunday church gatherings, and you did not need fancy ingredients to pull it together. The filling looked bright orange and odd to anyone who had never tried it, but it was creamy, sharp, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added extras like sliced pickles or lettuce, but the plain version stuck around because it was quick, cheap, and kept everyone fed when time was tight. Old cookbooks had pages of pimiento cheese variations, but the classic stayed the same: easy, portable, and just filling enough to get you through the day. Hot dog and cheese roll-ups were the lazy day lunch every kid begged for, and every parent. Cornflake peanut clusters delivered a satisfying crunch that ended many picnics on a sweet note. Cornflakes were poured